politics on even that sort of outside of electoral level. And I think that should provide us some grounded optimism. I appreciate Bernie. I think he's done a hell of a lot, and I look forward to see them constructively continue.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point that stuck with me from that Josh made was that we, in the absence of his campaign, the idea of Medicare for all being this mainstream simply wouldn't be out there.
Right.
And so now you can have, some op-ed writer on Forbes going like, maybe it looks like the obvious thing to do now. So it's on one hand, the idea of moral victories being really that and a quarter will get you a phone call.
Yeah. Right.
In some respects, the value of mainstreaming ideas and showing popular support for ideas becomes obviously far more important in moments like these, when, opportunity knocks, as it were, or needs knock, however you want to frame that.
I think there's a balance to it, because I like the way you set that up. I mean, the groundwork is really important, and things are in play now that maybe weren't there before. But I have a problem with this, and Bernie does it all the time. I think it's a bit of a bedtime story to talk about, the poll numbers changing on various policy issues when the battles aren't being won. And that does really concern me.
I agree. But I also think back to how many times that I've spoken to people who talk about, particularly, full-on socialists and even, communists that, people to the left and people, and maybe not even necessarily on economic terms, but when they talk about there is a failure of imagination, that we don't have the capacity to imagine a society reoriented in a different way. And one of the ways we could do that is we could send everybody to Denmark on a summer tour or something to that effect. But
that's what the campaign should do now.
Right. But just
send everybody
the same way
to
they
Denmark.
Do those things to Israel where where
exactly. Socialist birthright.
Exactly. And but the reason why so many of those conversations start out that way with, we need to be able to imagine, and it's not we need to be able to fantasize. It really is just being able to and imagine, it's one of those words that makes it sound a little bit frou-frou-y. I don't know. But we need a way of being able to envision something in the same way that I can think of, like, I can imagine this pause being over, and I can imagine what I'll do. I'll go out to a restaurant. I'll go to a movie. I'll take the kids to the playground. We need to be able to imagine something like we're all on Medicare. I go to the doctor and the doctor says, like, hi, come on in. And I leave and there's no like, where's the credit card? Or here are the 14 different things you got to file. Or, can I see your card? And I got to pull it up out of it. We need to be able to imagine that. And we
Absolutely.
need to be able to imagine the idea of like 14 million people are going to lose their job. Oh, this is going to be, this is going to be difficult. This is going to be difficult, but we have an apparatus that pre-exists that, we don't have to worry about health insurance for all these people. It's not even a topic of conversation. It's just like, okay, we have a mechanism in which we will pay employers to tell all these people to stay at home. That's already existing. We need to be able to imagine those things. And without,
I agree entirely.
I don't know if Sanders' campaign got us there. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but we're certainly a lot closer. And I think that is important in terms of like the wide understanding. And, I'm quite sure that back in 2016, running in the run up to the election, when we were talking about, what happens after a Donald Trump, if he were to win, when we were having arguments with people who are like, Donald Trump would not be problem. I am quite sure that I anticipated something like this by saying after George Bush, we got Barack Obama, and the idea that we're going to do better than Barack Obama after Donald Trump. I mean, I remember exactly where I was. I've said this a million times after Bill Clinton won. And, I was a comedian, and comedians were not that political at that time, but I was aware that Bill Clinton was the president, the chair of the DLC at the time. I was aware that it was a corporate organization. And, I remember sitting in the Cobb's Comedy Club with Mark Maron, watching everybody cheer at the results and just looking around going like, why is everybody so excited? Like, I get everybody saying, phew, no more Reagan, because everybody perceived Herbert Walker Bush as a second term of Reagan. And, those lessons suggested to me that the left often does better under an insufficient center to the left presidency.
I think,
at least as defined in the context of our country, because there isn't this, the broadly speaking, the center to the left does not have this sense of being under attack all the time. And their response to it is just, I don't want to be attacked. And so the left has an advantage when the center left and the center is sort of sleeping, that they don't have when there is, this sort of like grave threat to just whatever it is that the center left perceives. And that's what a Donald Trump is.
I think there's another paradoxical lesson to also draw from now too, where, I'll have sort of pushback that might earn me some annoyance from both quarters here, both sides. But I think that sorry?
That would be halves.
Excuse me, both halves. I'm a little tired, Sam. We're in quarantine.
Tell me about it. You see the bags in my eyes?
Do. I didn't even want to say, but Jesus Christ, buddy.
Yep.
I think that the nature of the Democratic Party changing, kind of going back to what you said, is another thing that's going to require some really honest assessment. That on one hand, of course, Sanders has shown that there's a real constituency here, and he's put policy options on the table, and he's trained people, and there's movement building and these other really, really important things. But the party as a whole, I don't perceive it as having in any way moved significantly to the left. And I think that that's something to be, to be honest about and really assess. I think the bigger point you're making actually fits with that, because it's like, even in such extreme circumstances, there isn't this sort of ideological recalibration for a better option. Essentially, it's still the same. It is the kind of like, it's, first this tragedy, then as farce version of 2008. Can we just get out of the disaster in an even sort of, heightened, and, what an election between Trump and Biden is almost like a Habsburg, election. This is really extreme and embarrassing to even contemplate this general election. I would also just add, I think, as far as imagining possibilities, I do think it's very important to look at the strikes that are taking place right now, the labor actions. I'll keep reiterating that, because I think if some of this is some things that are happening just via necessity, and people feel ashamed and terrorized, they can't pay their rent, they can't figure out their unemployment. So they're already actually participating in some sense in strikes on some level, whether it be rent strikes or otherwise. If that starts to become kind of synchronized, and this I think was the most important part of Occupy, was just one of the most important, was just the idea that people all of a sudden collectively said there was a major economic meltdown that came out of Wall Street. And this is not a personal failing of mine that I'm not in the workforce right now. Maybe it's a failure of Wall Street. Maybe it's a failure of policy. And I think right now you already see a much more aggressive expression of that in things like the Amazon strikes, that if people start to really realize that they're in this together, that this is not their fault, and that the policy mechanisms have been totally insufficient to meet their needs, maybe there can be some more sort of aggressive imagining of action. And I think that that's actually a very big opportunity right now, and something that, again, I wouldn't have emphasized a couple months ago because we weren't there, but we are there now.
Right. I mean, I think that's the whole point of the value of Sanders' campaign, is that those people are, I think for the most part, we have Target workers who are walking out today.
Yep.
And Josh Orton's, I guess, analogy of the sort of the barium that you put through, you drink, and it shows all the sort of flaws in the. I think to a certain extent, what's happening with for people is that they're starting to realize, like, hey, wait a second, I'm getting screwed here. Once, it's one, like, as the tide goes out, right, people start to realize, hey, I'm the first person not covered by water.
That's right.
However that works, or I'm the first person who is grounded in this situation. And the Sanders campaign has provided some solutions to what they are realizing is their problem. And hopefully, and like I say, there is no doubt in my mind that these movements are going to do better under a Biden presidency than a Trump presidency, because there are going to be, if you look at it as just sort of like a pyramid, there are going to be, and just in terms of the personnel, just staffing a Biden administration, which is massive, you're going to have different areas, smaller places, maybe at first, maybe in some higher places, where there are going to be people who are more sympathetic to these movements and are going to provide for them resources. And maybe those resources come in the form of, legislation. Maybe they come in the form of regulation that are going to make organizing easier, that are going to empower people in different ways, and are going to basically push other issues off the table, instead of like, hey, you shouldn't be allowing more mercury in the air, or hey, why are you having these private slaughterhouses inspect their own meat, or hey, why are you trying to take away Medicaid from 10 million people? Instead of that, it's going to be these other questions that that will get more attention. And that's,
I want to put another way that's maybe more provocative when I think about the dynamic of who you want having national power at a time like this. The Democratic Party in the iteration of Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer is dead. It has no, it can still obviously come together to win a primary and potentially the presidency if a lot breaks the right way electorally. And by the way, I think we need to be clear. I think, yes, the volume and the torrent will be different, but I think under a Biden presidency, you'll need to, we'll be back to the aughts. You'll be fighting another Simpson Bowles commission, Sam. We'll be fighting that. I have no doubt about that. But the relentlessness and the range of what's coming at people will obviously lessen. I think that's people need to be real about that. But in addition to that, I want to also say that having a totally dead project as almost like a caretaker government, and in some way, the more you look at Biden, it really starts to remind you of the Politburo and the Soviet Union before Gorbachev, when they just had a string of guys that were like just about to die just to keep the machinery going and protect people's narrow interests. That's really how I see it. But again, and so that is actually different than